the solution to my life's problems was when I came to the realization that I couldn't do it by myself. I met a mentor. He said, he walked me into a relationship with Christ, and I made a decision to surrender my life to Christ and to calibrate my life to the life He created me to live. And that meant making decisions in my everyday life of how I would respond to the things that happened to me. I didn't end up in that closet with a pistol in my hand because of what happened to me, because of my childhood, because of my marriage, because of losing buddies in Afghanistan, or the things I experienced today. I didn't end up at the point to want to take my life because of those things. I ended up there because of the way I responded to those things. Mm-hmm. I never lost the ability to respond the way I choose to respond to life. I had given it up and before. So I once I stepped into a relationship with Christ, and I had this mentor, Steve Toth, who you were talking about, Steve Toth,
right?
Who mentored me for a year. Steve Toth, basically, he mentored me in the biblical principles of manhood. So I inventoried my life and said, this is what my character looks like now, but this is what the Bible says my character should look like. And if I make these changes and tweaks in my life, I'm going to land in a pretty good spot, because this is the way I was intended to live life. And so I came to this realization that I didn't have to let my past define my future. I can move forward into a healthier life, in a more purposeful life. And through the decision of making those changes, that's where I found the restoration in PTSD, anxiety, depression, and my own brokenness in my own life and my marriage. That's where I found how to calibrate, how to be married, like we talked about earlier, like how to be married. For the first time, I didn't know how. Me and Kathy went into marriage and knowing how. That's where I learned how to be married, what it looked like. I found hope again. And I've ultimately found what I had sought home my whole life, and that was purpose.
You know, if we knew then what we know now, that's one of the sayings that we say a lot. But for somebody that might be going through similar situations, they just ain't quite grasping that's what's going on yet. What could you say to that guy?
Yeah, I mean, that's why we need to be surrounded by people. Always surround yourself by people who are where you want to be in life. And then put value on the advice they give you. A lot of times people, when you're in a bad situation and you reach out to people for advice, they always tell you things you don't want to hear. You want to be where they are, but you don't want to hear what they're having to say.
Right.
And you're not gonna end up where they are if you're not gonna listen to that advice. And especially when you're young, right? Like young kids, like 18, 19 years old, like, I want to do that one day. And okay, here's the path to do that. And I don't want to do all that. Well, it's the same thing with having a healthy life or having a healthy marriage. If you want to have a healthy marriage, then find a couple that's been married 10, 15 years longer than you, and learn about their struggles and their trials and how they navigated them and the things they made. If you're having panic and anxiety attacks, maybe talk to a counselor, a psychologist, but also maybe talk to someone that has had panic attacks and anxiety before. And that's why I think peer-to-peer programs like Mighty Oaks are so important. All of our instructors or people who have been through our program, graduated our program, they've been to combat, they came home, they fell on their face, but they got back up again. And they may not have it all figured out, but they're heading in the right direction, and they're wanting to pay it forward and take others along with them. I think there's so much value in learning those life lessons of wisdom from other people who have been there before you. That's what I do now, and I try to do that same thing for others behind that are trailing me.
Chad, do you mind if I ask a question here? Because you mentioned Steve Toth, and I wanted to know how that relationship developed. Did he seek you out? Did you seek him out? That there's something that he said, hey, this is a guy that needs help. Steve is one of our representatives here in Texas, and we've heard nothing but good things about him. But, when I started to read the book about your story, in fact, I contacted Steve. I said, are you this guy that worked with Chad? And that's me. Okay. And then I looked at his profile. Yeah, it says Mighty Oaks. But just tell us a little bit more about that. And, what all happened there? That, to me, that was, you had that mentor. And I've talked with many people, sometimes we say, well, let's go to counseling, but really a mentor is much better than counseling in many instances. So just tell me a little bit more about that whole relationship, what it did for you. Did your wife go through a mentor as well? Because I know that, it wasn't just you, as you said, that needed to have this mentoring, but you are the leader of the family and everything. But just give us a little bit more flavor to that.
Yeah. So if I could take you back to being in that closet. So when Kathy, I'm sitting there one day, and I'm in that closet, pistol. I'm trying to build up the courage to pull the trigger, and I heard a knock on my door, actually bang on my door, and I wasn't going to answer it. But then when I heard Kathy announce her voice, I actually hid that pistol. I don't know why I hid it. She would have never came in my closet. It was my apartment. Probably a shame, but I actually hid it. I went and answered the door, and we got in this argument. And during the argument, she asked me a question that radically changed my life. She asked me how I could do everything I did in the Marine Corps. She saw me become a recon Marine and all these training and schools and deployments, all the things I did and the discipline it took to do those things, training for these MMA fights and cutting weight. Like, I'm a pretty disciplined guy. So she's like, how could you do all of that? And when it comes to your family, you'll quit. And that question for me just, cut me to the core. She was absolutely right. I've been successful in professional things, but it came the most important thing, being a husband, being a father, being that young 17-year-old kid that raised his hand and said he wanted to do something important in his life. I quit all those things, including my own will to live. And I knew in that moment, like, I'm a pretty radical decision maker. I'm like all in or all out. And I knew in that moment that I had to make a 180-degree turn in my life and a decision, or I was going to lose everything, including my life, because I knew at that point I did not want to live anymore. And so I knew, one, I couldn't do it by myself, and two, I couldn't do it with the people I surrounded myself by, because I had being a fighter and being like highly ranked and not having an MMA school, like I was able to kind of control my environment. And so anyone that tried to put accountability in my life, I kind of pushed them out of my life. So I had people around me that told me everything I wanted to hear and not what I needed to hear. And so I knew I needed someone outside of my circle to step into my life. And I asked my wife, Kathy, who had been going to this church in our community, Woods Edge in Woodlands, Texas. I asked her if there was someone at this church, a man at this church she was going to, that could help hold me accountable to this decision to change my life. And she introduced me to Steve Toth. I met Steve. Steve was just on call at the church at the time. In fact, he was meeting me to connect me to someone else. But when I met him, he had the perfect gifts like to help me. He wasn't an MMA fighter or a military guy, but he has ADD like really bad. So that was the gift. And the reason I say it's a gift because and Steve, when I say he has ADD really bad, like literally if you go eat lunch with Steve, he doesn't walk to his car, he runs, because like walking's wasting his time. He's like no patience at all. And so the reason this was a gift for me is because I was so manipulative. And in fact, I probably intended to manipulate him. I'd written like a 5-paragraph order, a plan of how I was going to fix my life. And I remember sitting down with him at Starbucks, and I slid it over to him, like really smug, like, hey, check this out, like show it to my wife so you can like tell her I'm actually trying here. And he didn't even read it. He like slid it back over to me and told me I was going to fail. And I said, and I was like very offended. I was ticked up because I had like an attitude, and I was trying to control the situation because I'm so manipulative. And I remember thinking like, who's this guy? Like I like taking my time to meet with him, and he's like, which is my attitude. And he's not even going to read this thing I put together, and not even realizing that he's giving me his time. In that moment, he tapped. I remember he tapped on that paper, my plan. He said, "This thing doesn't have anything to do with your relationship with God. I'm not going to waste your time, and I'm not going to let you waste time." And at that time in my life, I had tried everything. I tried the pills. I've been through counseling and the programs, and I tried the MMA and jiu-jitsu and making money and having a notoriety, all those things. And some of those things are good, some of those things are bad, but none of those things changed my situation. So I knew I tried everything, and it was time to try something different. In fact, at Mighty Oaks Foundation, we have this saying, if what you're doing isn't working, then why not try something different? And what I was doing wasn't working. It was time for me to try something different. And I just figured I'd just trust this guy, and what did I have to lose? And gave God a chance and surrendered my life to Christ. And that decision radically changed my life.